so we were going over my books of layouts and stuff like that, just to kind of sort of prime the pump, show you guys sort of the amount of work that goes in and also the kind of work that I do, at least with comic art and sequential art. After my first novel, which we discussed yesterday a little bit, Enemy Ace War Idol, the next big project I had was the Batman Harvest Breed graphic novel. And again, 128 page hardcover comic extravaganza. So what I was going to break open, well, I can show you a little bit of the book. And again, this was my tail end of my New York experience. I'd been in New York for 18 years. I got there in 1980 and I left in 1998 and moved to North Carolina, got married, had kids, and this bridged that gap. So I had the idea for the Batman book was, when you read comics, of course, you get so involved in the characters and the storyline and the canon, And for me, it was, I was always, the beauty of doing comics is that I can make the characters, all these characters I read as a kid, I can actually make them do things. And because I always was like, how come Batman never kills people? How come he never throws criminals off the rooftops? So I got to do that. So anyway, so I pitched this idea to DC Comics about the idea that Batman has a nightmare that he lives with. And the nightmare is that he kills people and that he throws them, off rooftops, and he does all these horrible things. And it's sort of the dream that keeps him walking the straight and narrow. So he doesn't do that in real life, But what happens when the dream stops? And then he starts like kind of losing it and walking this weird edge and getting more and more violent and all this weirdness. And then it's wrapped up in a whole murder mystery. So anyway, that's Harvest Breed, Batman. And there were a number of things that were actually kind of weird about, Batman was the whole reason I became an artist, period. I mean, it was Batman that made me want to draw anything, much less just comic books. But so anyway, so this should have been my massive dream project. Now, a lot of the Batman covers that I did were dream projects. I got to, what if Batman's hanging upside down like a bat, that kind of stuff. So I got to play with all these things I always wondered as a kid. So it should have been a dream project, but it ended up, I had like some issues with the editor that I was working with, wanted me to basically kind of redo what I did with Enemy Ace. And as I mentioned yesterday, Batman is not real to me. Batman's a comic book character. And Enemy Ace was real. It's the Red Baron and it's World War I and Vietnam, and that is real to me. In the whole plot, the struggle of these two soldiers, that was real to me, and it's a real thing in real life for a lot of people. And Batman is not, and I was like, yeah, but Batman's not real, and I haven't painted this way. When I finished Enemy Ace, I was wiped out. I was so done with watercolor, other than some pieces that I was doing for gallery work in the galleries that I was in New York and Houston and whatever. But he was very insistent, and I was going to people above him and just like, man, this is like turning into a nightmare. And he was like, well, you did like, it was just like you did a 3-act whatever. And I'm like, yeah, just like Enemy Ace. So it's like, you can't have it both ways. It's like you wanted this, but now you don't want. I'm like, oh my God, it was insane. Anyway, I came up with ways to have a good time with this book, but it still left a really sour taste in my mouth. And so there were lots of visual things that I was doing with technique that were storytelling devices that I was bringing into the mix here that I had not done in Enemy Ace. Enemy Ace was pretty straightforward painting. So in Batman, I started playing with, because I had these things. There was his dream state. There was flashbacks to Vietnam. There was, historical references that I wanted. I wanted to have a visual point of demarcation for each of those things that would become sort of visual touchstones that readers would know they flipped into these different sort of timelines or states of consciousness. So for Batman's dreams, his nightmares, I did monotypes that I colorized in Photoshop. And let's see. So again, monotypes, different sort of look from the painted material. And let's see. For Vietnam, I did. It's got a girl who's sort of I don't know what you'd call her. She's not. It's not voodoo or anything like that, but she's like sort of a mysticky kind of. Anyway, she has powers, but her stepfather, she's Vietnamese, but her stepfather was a soldier in Nam, and so for all that stuff, I did pen and ink sometimes with charcoal here, and I would then cover them with sailboat varnish, which gave it this wild, cool golden cast to those images. And would separate it from, the rest of the story in a different way. So that became his flashbacks, stepfather's flashbacks. Historical stuff was like sort of this same technique, but I went in with, it's in here somewhere, went in with oils on top of that and painted things. Just not sure where those are. Yeah. So I went in with more like highlights and stuff like that with blood red color and things with the demons and whatnot. My son had just been born. He got to be the devil child. So anyway, so I was able to find ways to make this interesting, and that's something that is actually not a bad point to bring up. Is that if you're an illustrator, it's one thing when you're a fine artist, the only person you really have to satisfy is yourself, and that's not an easy task either. But with an illustrator, you have a sort of double duty on that. You've got to satisfy whoever gave you that job, right? You need to satisfy the client, quote unquote, which for me was DC Comics. But the more difficult job is, how do you take the thing that they've tasked you with, and they didn't actually task me with this book. It was something I came up with and approached them and sold them on the idea, pitched it to them, and got the job. But how do you satisfy yourself creatively can be a very difficult thing in the middle of something like this, where you're juggling these two, needs. So for myself, finding those little bits of areas to involve myself in saved the day for me. Along with this became my first book too, where I was sort of toying with, I was painting full up pages, but then like some of this stuff, I was bringing the computer in to act as a, Photoshop became an aggregate sort of collector of the images and put them together. So, Photoshop became the sort of digital management device to put these together to create pages based on my layouts, which I will show you. So anyway, that's how that book came about. One of the and like on the back cover you can see, it's like I had gone on a trip for Enemy Ace. My friend Scott Hampton, who's one of the best storytellers in the business, he and I were really good pals. Like I mentioned before, he would drive up, and he was the reason that book ever came out, because he forced it at DC. We were flown we did a signing tour through Germany and through Austria back then. I did it for this book, and he did it for his Batman graphic novel. And so anyway, I was out there taking a ton of pictures, and I took lots of pictures of the cathedral in Cologne, and that's what became my reference for the Arkham Asylum, the church in Gotham City. And so, I thought it was kind of fun. I took a piece of my Holocaust series, that I'm still has never been published. I'm working on that forever. And one of these faces and stuff. And then I put the ears where the church cathedral spires, and also his nose. And that's how I kind of created this weird, kind of creepy Batman thing for the back cover. And then the flaps were also, I took old monotypes of mine and stretched them and colorized them and did funky stuff for the flaps. So that was sort of my, when I did the X-Files covers, that was when I bought my first computer. It was a Mac 2CI, little workhorse, very slow workhorse, but that was the state of play back then. But so I used X-Files as a way to teach myself Photoshop and Quark and all that kind of stuff. But I was getting paid to do it, which was great. But this became the first like book that I was actually employing. I was painting full pages, but then starting to play with putting pages together in Photoshop. And then in Wolverine is where I embraced that whole process and said, okay, screw it. I'm throwing all this out. I'm doing panels and I'll put them together. Because the thing that happened in the Batman book also that I think is important to know, I was doing, and I didn't bring any of those I was doing lots of drawings of the panels on separate sheets of paper on Canson drawing pads. And I was with pencil, and I was having a lot of fun drawing again, but then I had to take those, and I was really happy with these drawings, but then I had to take them, put them in I would put them in my old, which I never use, but all of a sudden I found a use for it because I was blowing things up. What do you call it? I can't even think of it. It's like a Lucy, but there's a name for it, a brand name. Anyway, I put it in that thing and I would blow them up and I would trace them out on my boards. So I would transfer those to the boards and I had to paint them. And I felt that I was losing so much in the translation of that because those aren't direct drawings at that point. That's me, tracing and, whatever. And it's just lost all the energy and any artist can tell you, you sit down and do roughs and little thumbnails and gesture drawings, you can never capture that in finals. I mean, it's impossible, which is why I've abandoned so many working methods over the years, and I just go straight at it, and whatever happens, happens. And I'm totally in love with that idea because then I'm not second guessing anything. What you get is what you get. That to me is like so honest and visceral, So anyway, that was a real, in that sense, this was a real growth, creatively for me, but the anxiety and the angst and what a pain. So yeah, and that was interesting. Oh, and see here, it's interesting. So in the D, you can see it here, which is cool. Another thing I ran into, and I had a big argument with the powers that be, was censorship. And I mean, that's Batman. I know I'm going to get censored on certain things. It's their baby. But you can see the cross here. And over here on the cover, it came out with no cross. And I'm like, what? I don't understand what's going on. And they're like, oh my God, we took it out. I'm like, well, but that should have been I should have been the one to make that change at the very least. I may not be able to argue that I can't put it on there, but now it's just another building, and the whole point is this is a whole thing about good and evil and whatever. And, so when I went to the paperback, when they were saying, oh, we need a new cover for the soft cover, I said, well, I need a conference call with the president and the editor in chief and blah, blah, and my editor, blah, blah, blah. So that we got on this, and this is before, way before Zoom or any of that. So it was just a call. And I think I have it in here. Maybe I don't. Let me see. May not. I don't think I do. Well, anyway, long and short of it is I argued vehemently, well, because I said, hey, I can put the swastika all over the place, but I can't put the cross. You know what I mean? The sign of like supposedly good, and they're like, yeah, well, but the Christian right, we don't want to go there. And it's like, well, but it's a positive thing. It's not, we're not ragging on the church. We're they don't read the books. They just think it's a bad look. And I'm like, so I said, well, and so I argued big time online. I mean, on the phone with them, and said, because I had turned in a sketch of Batman basically holding the cross, but he's vomiting blood, you know. So they're like, you can't do that. And so they said, well, okay, well, all right. They sort of gave me a pass. They said, okay, you can. I'm sure I got the sketch in here. They said, you can, as long as he doesn't physically interact with the cross, we'll leave it on there. And so this is sort of what he's still vomiting blood, but you know. But anyway, they let it go. So I was like, wow, score one for the artists, you know, for the creatives. So anyway, so these are my Batman layouts, and you can see I started big, and then I was like, you know what? I need to find a way to simplify my layout so that I'm not noodling and I'm not getting involved in drawing, because layout is not about drawing. Breaking down a story is not about drawing. It's about storytelling, period. It's pieces on a chessboard that we're moving around for compositional integrity and sake, right? And I want to overlap things, you know, for depth and whatever. And it's like, it's not about, oh man, I didn't get Batman's nose right. You know, I didn't get Wolverine's whiskers okay. It's like, there's none of that stuff. It's like character A with character B, who, what, when, where, you know, that's what you're working towards. So I switched gears. This is the opening sequence, which is Batman in the rafters, bleeding in the church. So I'm opening the story basically at the end of the story, where this is the end of the story, and then he's bleeding, and we're doing a slow zoom to Batman's bloody arm, and then you see this drop of blood fill up on his pinky and drop and become the sun, which is reflected in Commissioner Gordon's thing at night, and they're at a murder scene. So so I did that fairly large, but then I was like, oh no, so I switched gears entirely, and I went to 8.5 by 11 toned paper. I printed, I in cork. This is back when I was using cork. I guess they're still around. I don't know. I gave up on them. They just kept jerking everyone around. But man, I love that program too. It was so easy to work. And now I'm on InDesign, whole other thing. But I designed this sort of layout with spreads. You know, these are facing pages. Any book, you know, your first page actually begins on a right-hand page. And then you have spreads. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, you know. So I definitely I'm very conscious of designing for spreads, because they are going to have to work together when a reader is looking at them, and you're going to need to be able to pace, like whether you really want any reveal on a page, because the one thing you can't stop a reader from doing is just turning the page and seeing this whole thing, right? I mean, you can't control that. You can try to keep them moving panel to panel, obviously, right? Yeah, that's the real struggle. But you can't prevent them from just seeing things. So, you know, if there's an important deal, you really want to try and hide it for that reveal, for when they flip that page. That becomes a very important consideration. So I design for spreads, you know, and I'm not alone in this. There's you'll get a lot of comic artists will do that. Some may not, you know. But I don't have one on me, but it was like, let's see if I can grab it out of my pants pocket here. Pretty sure I put it in here. Yep. I'll throw this out, but it's not the same. This is even a tighter line than what I was using. You know, I was using a Sharpie, the fine tip Sharpie, which is not that fine, right? To draw these things. And you can see I wasn't penciling anything. I was going straight in with a pen and thinking in terms of shapes and solid black areas, positive, negative spaces, pure design. And then I was also using 2 crayons, this one and It probably was this one, the blood red. Red and green, a complementary palette, for no other reason than they pop. There was no big time, thought process behind what colors I chose. I just needed something that would knock things back and come forward. Um, so I was thinking of value a little bit as depth, right? And simplicity. I didn't want to get to where I could draw anything. And I wanted to force myself not to be able to do it. And going small like this, there's no way I could detail or noodle anything really. So that was a good thing. And so going through these, you can see little check marks here over various things. It changed over the course of this book because I started scanning things and because I had different pages I inserted, which threw off some of my elaborate setups. Well, that gives you an idea. There's one of the drawings actually. So man, I love the energy of this, and it's real direct pencil. When I draw anything, I never do center lines. There's no constructive anatomy going on. I don't do any kind of, all right, I got to get the shape down very lightly and whatever. I don't set anything up at all. I just, man, put it down like you mean it. If it looks horrible, okay, I can do another one. I didn't waste any time. So anyway, I was really happy with these drawings, and then I had to let's see if we can find that in the book to show you what it became. It may very well have been that one big shot, because I was finding, like I mentioned yesterday, bringing things into documents that I was preparing in Quark, and things were blowing up because I was scanning them so large that so this may very well have been it. It looks like maybe it was. And then, but I left this crop, this sort of extreme close-up. But see, I wanted to have it more graphic like this with the line and, because Batman's not real. So anyway, I don't know if I have any other drawings in here. Glad that's in there, though. And it gives you a little, the model for that was one of my ex-students who's a really good artist. She does children's books now. Anyway, and I drove from North Carolina to somewhere in New York City, upstate. I don't remember where I was, to photograph her for that, to do that shoot. So anyway, that's what those check marks mean, is that I photographed my reference. I have my reference and I'm checking things off as I go. So this is where the real meat and potatoes, the real work happens in comics. It's, in some ways, it's the funnest aspect. In some ways, it's the most, aggravating, nail biting, because you're trying to figure out the best way to tell a story. And what you're seeing here really are the finished layouts, and not the amount of work that goes into behind some of those pages, which, back and forth, until I arrive at a certain layout where I'm like, okay, let me, that's that. So it changed, considerably, until I was like, that's the one I'm using, I think that's it. It may not be, but there's lots of stuff that I play with before I get to that final layout. And we'll go in depth in this course, where you'll see how that works and the amount of work that goes into some of this. And you can see later on, it looks like I did break out the pencil and just start not going, even this became, too much work, right? So it's like, I just got to get to the point and move on. So the became even simpler. I stopped putting in the solid blacks and all that kind of stuff. Down to the last scenes, I'm glad that was in there. This is my unpublished blues novel that I actually started when I was working on Enemy Ace. Um, I went into Tower Records back when it was still vinyl, but they had just come out with CDs. And I went up to the folk section, and I had just bought a CD player, a Discman, let you know how far back that was. And it was like this monster that had to be fed. I mean, oh my God, I was like hooked, and but I couldn't afford a lot of CDs. But I was like, oh, sound was so good, and they were playing this music up there that just blew me away. And it was Mississippi John Hurt it was just him in the '60s on a guitar, and I was like, oh my God, who is this? And it just took my breath away. And so I bought that disc, went home, and I played that thing into the ground while I was working on Enemy Ace. And I was like, and I was never a big blues fan before that at all. And this was country blues, acoustic guitar, and one man just singing these songs. And I was like, oh my God, I got to do something about this. You know what I mean? And my mother's from Mississippi, so I have an actual connection to that place. I spent a lot of summers there as a kid, and stuff. And so I took a trip. I said, you know what, I'm going to do a trip. And so I went down to Texas with my mom and dad, and then rented a car and drove into Mississippi. No plans. I mean, my aunt was still there. My grandmother was still alive. So that was going to be the hub. And I made these forays into the Mississippi Delta and just knocking on doors and interviewing old blues guys and stuff. And then I started dating this English girl. She totally broke my heart, found out all kinds of horrible things, and I had the blues. And so it then became this weird memoir slash, this weird amalgam of fiction and fact and all kinds of memoir. I mean, it was just everything thrown in. And so anyway, it's an actual novel. It's a text novel, 300-page novel with comics in it and photographs. I was photographing. I was recording while I was on the trip. All these guys playing songs, telling me their stories. I saw, man, I was ahead of the curve. I had this multimedia book, and I couldn't get. DC wanted to publish it, Warner Books and all that. But the thing was, they wanted to own everything, right? Oh, but you'll be able to use the Warner Brother recording studios. It's going to be great. You're going to make a ton of money. And I'm like, it's not about the money. It's about this book. It's got to be this kind of a book and whatever. And they just couldn't. And they said, oh, and you can be the one to do the sequel. I'm like, there is no sequel. What do you mean a sequel? They're like, well, the follow-up. There is no follow-up. This is a self-contained thing. It begins and it ends. And they're like, well, then you can be the one though. If you don't want to do it, you can hire someone that you think is going to do it well, and they can do it. I'm like, you're not hearing me. It doesn't go on. It's it. So anyway, I bailed. I'm like, forget it. You can't have it. And see, I've been offered chances to sell out, and I've been an idiot, and I didn't do it. So anyway. So these are my layouts for the comic sections that are in that book. And this was, Johnny Winter is from my hometown. My dad was his family's doctor. And I came home. There's all this weird synchronicity stuff that happens when you're an artist and you're working on these projects. And I know it's not just me. It happens to everybody. And people come out of the woodwork and want to help. They're excited about the prospect of being involved and stuff. And I was home visiting, and I'd written this thing, and I was showing a friend of the family the material, and she was like, you should talk to Johnny Winter. I was like, yeah, man, would I ever love that, And she's like, no, really. She goes, what's your phone number? And this is way before cell phones, It's like I had a landline in Brooklyn. She's like, give me your number. So I give it to her, and she actually had a cell phone, like a, I don't know, satellite phone or something. If she calls Johnny Winter's mom, she goes, hey, I have something, Johnny needs to call this guy. Needs to talk to him. Okay, so she gave his mom the number. I get home to New York, and my little answering machine light is blinking. And so I'm listening, and it goes, hi, this is Johnny Winter. My mom says I'm supposed to call you, you know. She's like, holy shit. So anyway, I call him back and I'm like, yeah, I'm doing this blues book and, you know, I would love to, you know, show you what I'm doing and whatever. And then out of the blue, I get a call from D'Addario Guitar Strings, Synchronicity. And they want me to do, of all things, a portrait of Johnny Winter to advertise their guitar strings. And I'm like, sign me up, you know. And so I sent my sketches in, and his agent was like, no, I don't like any of these. Start over. But then here I am talking to Johnny, and I'm like, hey, I just sent all these sketches in. Your guy shot them all down. I said, but can I show them to you and see what you think? And he goes, yeah, okay. So I went to his house in Manhattan, and I had just gotten back from Mississippi, and where it was my grandmother's funeral, and I had revisited one of the old bluesmen that I saw, that I met years before, and Jack Owens, who at that time now was like 90 something years old, and sat there and played him some Johnny, and I actually played him some Johnny Winter, and he was like, "Oh my God!" He goes, "This guy's like me. He's like a note man, you know, whatever." And so I recorded Jack playing a little bit, and Jack was in Bentonia, Mississippi, which is where Skip James, if you're a blues guy, Skip James is from. Skip James is, if you ever heard, I think it's Cream, did "I'm So Glad." They did that song so they could help Skip James pay his doctor bills when he was dying from cancer. Anyway, so I go to Johnny's house. I'm showing him my sketches, and you know, and he was, you know, Johnny, he was albino, and so he was, to look at these things, he was like this, looking at my sketches, and he said, "Well, I like this one," and I said, "Okay, that's what I'm going to do." And he goes, "Yeah." He goes, "Okay, but what if I don't like it, the final painting?" I said, "Then I'll do you another one." He goes, "Okay, cool," you know. So, and then I said, "You got to hear this music of this blues man, Jack Owens, who was cousins with Skip James in Bentonia." And Johnny goes, "Oh man," he goes, "Bentonia." He goes, "You know, they say that it's in the mud, that the music is in the mud there." He goes, "I don't buy that for a second." And I'm like, "Well, listen to this." And I played him Jack Owens, and he's like, "Oh my God." He goes, "I got to go to Bentonia and roll around in the mud a little bit." It's like, it was so cool. Anyway, there's a mutual appreciation society between these two blues guys. And so anyway, I did this big painting of Johnny Winter, of him naked to the waist with his hat on, which he had two rattlesnakes, you know, spit like they're getting ready to bite. And he's got all these tattoos, you know, he's got a dragon tattoo. I mean, it's crazy. So I drew him with his shirt off on his National Steel guitar going to town. And so I had to get it accepted, right? I had to get his approval. So I said, "Hey, I've got the painting done. I need to show it to you and get your approval." And he goes, "Oh man," he goes, "that's great." He goes, "Come to the Sony recording studios. We're going to be practicing for a gig." And I was like, "Man, cool." So I go to the Sony recording studios. We go in, and it's just him, his manager was there, and his band, which was two guys, a drummer and another guitarist or bassist, I can't remember now. And they looked at the painting, and they're like, "Yeah, we love it." I'm like, "Sweet, golden." And then I'm like, can I keep hanging out? I'm like, you know, "Can I stay?" And he's like, "Well, that's why I had you come out here. I want you to just hang out." I was like, "Cool." And man, I got like 5 hours of Johnny Winter wailing, just playing this stuff and then telling stories, and it was amazing. And I was a bad boy. I had my tape recorder in my pocket, and I'm like, turn that thing on. So I got like an hour or something of him telling stories and wailing on this guitar. Unbelievable. And I've never done anything with it. Anyway, and there's a funny story about that painting too. It was accepted into the Society of Illustrators that year. D'Addario bought the original, and I'd been paid for it, but it was in the society show, and I went to pick it up. Giant box, waiting forever on the train to go back to Brooklyn. Got on the train in rush hour, man. I mean, you know, throngs of people. And I'm like halfway to Brooklyn, and I'm like, "Oh my God, I left that painting on the platform. Holy sh! I'm like, oh, freaking out. I get on the train. I'm like, oh, get all the way back. And there's this group of old ladies hovering over the box and they're getting ready to open it up. And I ran up and I'm like, oh my God. They're like, is this yours? I'm like, yes. Oh my God. I'd already spent that money and everything. It was going to be a nightmare. But anyway, that worked out. I lucked out. So anyway, so I had like aspirations of hoping to, get Johnny to be in the comic book. But and we at this point too, I had been approached by Stephen Budlong, a director, who wanted to do a documentary on how I handled history on Enemy Ace. And I said, man, I'm totally burned out on this war thing, but I'm doing this other project on the blues, which is historical, and you can follow it from day one. He's like, yo, man. So, which I'd already made my trip, right, to Mississippi. And so what we did was fly down to Mississippi and retrace my entire journey. And then, with a film crew. And that was a scary thing because it was like, I remember getting to LaGuardia and those guys are out there with like 14 giant boxes full of equipment and all this stuff. And I'm like, oh, shiz, is scary, like this is real. Anyway, and these guys had shot, these documentaries on like, the Ozarks musicians and stuff like that. And so they were like, I kept telling them like, look, some of these guys like Jack Owens, he's the real deal, and they're like, yeah, whatever. Like we've done this a million times. Like, all right, cool. And I remember we get to Jack's place and they're like, oh my God, this guy's like the real deal. I'm like, yeah, I've been telling you that. It's like, anyway, but so we did an hour-long documentary. And when it took us 5 years to edit this thing. And we finally presented it at the New York International Independent Film Festival. And we invited Johnny Winter. He showed up in a stretch limo and he came into the opening. It was great. And we ended up winning Best Feature Documentary at the New York International Independent Film Festival that year. But so these are my layouts for that. And, and I put together a thing which you'll see at some point where I've documented my layouts through the years. And my hope was like, wow, it's going to be really cool because when I put it all together, you're going to see how I went from, the young neophyte who's like all about drawing and then slowly going towards this guy who's like, man, got it all together. And it's like so simple and like direct. And it didn't work out that way. Every project is its own animal and they all require some different mind, different head, than the one before it, And so anyway, I was getting very immersed in the subject and like I really wanted to wring out every single thing I could through these things. And to go back real quickly, like this is the finished art of a sequence that you'll see the sketch for. But and even then, see, this is way before I ever thought about doing separate images and putting them together in a computer. I was doing full pages. So what this is like focused on Johnny's tattoos, and that's one on his wrist, if I remember correctly. And then we're moving. It's almost like the tattoos, the star and the dragon are talking to you, and then you pull away, and it's Johnny Winter smoking, telling the tale. Anyway, so I got very involved in these layouts, thinking in terms of placement of the light and shadow, but still working shape and time, playing with time. And this is supposed to be like this panel here is actually supposed to be like this, but I added it later. Like I wanted to start with the moon. It's late at night. We're hanging out, drinking suds, So I added that. Rather than redraw the whole thing, I just drew the addition and stuck it on top. This whole thing where they're describing basically which is like sort of the origin story of Blind Boy. The book is called See You in Hell, Blind Boy. And trying to work like he's dripping and then it falls, and then so I'm forcing you to go up and down through these tails. And as you can see too, I'm very conscious of, Like here's a silent panel, and then I'm very conscious of the dialogue and whether you're reading it first or you're seeing the image first. That's very important. Um, then I went to quarter pages. This is when I go to see Jack Owens for the first time. And it's the only time in my entire trip that I ran into like racial bullshit here at an old grain and feed store with a bunch of old white guys. And so, and I just, and here I am. I had hair down to here back then, so, and they're just going off because I'm trying to find this old black guy and they're like just being assholes. And I remember like, so here's what did happen. And it's me, yeah, because I didn't say anything. I was just like, what, and I'm just getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And so I leave. I'm this little guy leaving the place feeling like an asshole. And then what I wish happened was like, grab the guy, yank him over the counter, wham, 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 like a cartoon, throw him out of the window and drive over him, and what did happen, and I go out there and I get in the car and I'm like this little peon and I'm turning the giant key and I'm driving off feeling like a chump. So you can see I got very involved in these, getting really, I did get tight on these because I was trying to really know that what I was doing was it, So, and I've had people tell me I've never done the finishes and everybody's just, man, just print it like this. What the hell, It's like, yeah, maybe. I don't know. And some of the things I was really happy, like I was going in and out of the little micro cassette player in the hotel and they're telling me the story. And then I go and then it cuts to like the person telling the story, them remembering back, and it's at night, same as it's at night at the hotel, and then they're listening, and then it cuts to me again in my hotel room listening to what they were talking about, and you can see the little light switch up here, and it's like cut to, there's a leaf falls off, floats down, and it's Blind Boy out there playing the guitar, and you can see he's looking up at the moon, and then you see a hand reach up into the moon, and it's my hand pulling the chain, turning the light out. Fun stuff. Then I go to this guy's place and his dogs are all over the place. And it turns out he's a real asshole and his dogs are assholes too. And they're like sniffing around. They're peeing on me, peeing on my car. It's like, peeing on my car. And he hands me a penny, which is basically like an FU. And I'm driving off and the dog's taking a crap. I mean, Or that's the original, like trying to figure out the Johnny Winter sequence. This trying to figure out that sequence here, where it's the old guy with the young boys out by the pond, trying to pace this correctly. And that stuff where I'm trying to figure out how best to show the whole house burning clan nastiness. And these are more finished drawings that were done for the video, for the movie, but which would be included. And this is where a lot of songs were written about this actual place. It's called where the Southern crosses the dog, and that was the place where a lot of bluesmen got off the trains that they were hitchhiking on to get to Clarksdale, and they all wrote songs about this place, and that's the actual place. This is Mississippi John Hurt's son, who I met on my trip. And that whole reason that I was into the blues was his father, right? And this is during the blues documentary, we got John Jr. and took him to, that's the Shotgun Shack that he grew up in Mississippi. And at that time, it was still there. And it was there, obviously, for my first trip. It's gone now. It's in a museum somewhere, this building. But that's where Mississippi John Hurt wrote so many of those songs that we love, and that's him. I walked him up to the mud was so bad when we went on our trip that we couldn't get the van up to the cemetery at the top of the hill. So John Jr. and I walked up there with a film crew, and then I was shooting 2 1/4 medium format But that's him at his father's grave. Skip James. This is Jack Owens. Give you an idea, man. Well, here, let's see. There's Jack. Awesome. Unbelievable. Unbelievable blues man. He died before our movie came out. So we dedicated the film to him. That was a lot of the 35 millimeter was my first trip. I was just shooting 35. And then later for the documentary film, I bought a used medium format camera, and then I was shooting 35 and medium format. That's Jeff Longino in my mom's hometown, who was a piano guy. He was the first person I talked to. That was an amazing thing. He's like, I interviewed him a little bit at his tire shop, and then he's like, "What are you doing later tonight?" And I'm like, "Nothing." He goes, "Come here at closing time." So I show up at 5, and he's like, which I could just walk there, but I drove, from my grandmother's home, and he's like, "Do you partake of alcohol?" I'm like, "Oh yeah." So he's like, "Okay." We got in his car, went to the liquor store. He got Thunderbird wine or something like that, and I got Jack Daniels. He like literally threw away his cap, and he's driving. It's pitch black outside. We're driving into the country, and he's like, he goes, "Try and come up with some tunes. You can try and stump me." And we got to his brother's house, middle of nowhere. I have no idea where I am. We go in. He goes, "My brother's got a baby grand." We go in there, flips the lights on, baby grand piano. He got a couple glasses, and he just jammed. And I was like, and I recorded everything, photographed while he was playing and stuff. And then we left and went back, and we sat in front of his tire shop till 3 a.m, talking about racism, about love, about religion, about everything, man. It was like unbelievable, mind blowing. And I saw him several times over the years as well. So the one thing I didn't want this book to be was white guy goes down and shows all the black people how it's done, that crap. It's like, no, these guys saved me, what I was going through, and taught me how to get past things, and expose me to their lives in a way that a book could never do. And so it wasn't, hopefully that comes through in the book, because it just seems so damn typical, and I wanted it to not be that. This is all from the documentary. This is Wade Walton, who's a barber in Clarksdale. That's Muddy Waters' original cabin that he recorded his Library of Congress recordings in the 40s, and on the plantation. And it was built prior to the Civil War, that building. Crazy. He was real, I mentioned it in the film, he was very standoffish in a way, because he had been told all these, "Oh, you're going to be rich, you're going to be," and I was like, nobody's getting rich off this thing. And I'm like, but I had guitar strings. I gave people guitar strings, and I had booze on me, and we talked about it, and he was like, "Oh man." So we had a great time. He played harmonica. I don't think I have the other shots. He played electric guitar. I brought my guitar with me too. I have a Martin Cutaway, OMC 28, and he would like put it behind his head. He was playing backwards and stuff. I mean, it was like great. People were just wandering in off the street, listening to the blues, man. It was awesome. This is one of the 3 graves of Robert Johnson. Here's cotton, these cotton fields that just went out forever. More drawings for the film. All right, that's the blues. This is Entropy, a character that I came up with years ago. I've done paintings of him, which actually I got a gold medal Spectrum Award with one of the paintings of Entropy years ago. And this first story was published in Heavy Metal. Silent story of entropy and his pet cat. He's the physical embodiment of entropy. So his job is to make things fall apart and change and whatever, but he hates his job, you know? And he keeps trying to buck the system. So this was all my original stuff for that character. And I'm working on a new one for this Kickstarter that I'm working on that's going to reprint all my short sequential work into one big fat book with a bunch of new stuff that's unpublished. So like the cat, it's great because they're mystical beings. The cat can be a giant, bigger than mountains and small as molecules. And so all my layouts, these are Xeroxes, are in my sketchbooks from the time period. And I was doing their 4-page stories. So that's what all this stuff is. And that's how I wrote the stories, was in layout form. So I have something like 40 different stories of this character running around. And it's basically sort of my homage to Jeffrey Jones and his Idol strip that he did for National Lampoon for years, which was a 1-page strip. Anyway. Like here, it's entropy experiencing life, So he's a birch tree, and you see a little exclamation mark, like, oh my God. And then he's like flies around he's jumping from fly to fly around a cow, It's, and just like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, he's loving everything. So anyway, fun stuff. Here he's like between two pebbles, but they're like boulders. One image split into panels, right? One I began. So again, and then some written stories. Each one of these is a story. Oh, this is for Trench. Another thing that I'm working on that has been on for years. My son is giving me grief all the time. You need to start this, Dad. You got to do this. You got to do this. And it's like, yeah, but I'm not being paid to do it. So this is a fun image I want to do where you're looking down on the trenches, and it's a guy. That's my main character in the trench at the bottom in the water, and it looks like he's floating in the clouds, but it's really him in the trench at the bottom of the trench in the water in the mud. Playing with silhouettes. World War I stuff. And these are like people's takes, which you'll be able to download some of these things there. This is a take off of Wally Wood's 22 Panels That Always Work. And Wally Wood was one of the greats, one of the kings, one of the best storytellers. Died in the 1980, I think, 81. But he came up here. Let's see if I have the original in here. Please. Well, you'll get the original anyway. It's one of his studio assistants, Larry Hama, who's a big-time editor now, who I actually tried to get work from at Marvel years ago, put it together. This is someone else's thing, but it's 22 Panels That Always Work. Instead of drawing a bunch of headshots of people sitting in a room where a writer all of a sudden has this like expository discussion between these characters that goes on forever, and what do you do with that, So here's 22 Panels That Always Work. That allows you to get out of the house and show other ways of dealing with that situation. It's a really, really great piece of storytelling knowledge. And this is another thing I've been working on also, which is a African folktale, which you'll see maybe in more detail. But these are my initial layouts from the early 90s. And I started doing the actual finished work, and I just stopped working on it. And then I took it up again about a year ago, and I was like, yeah, but I don't draw this way anymore. So I started redoing it in a way that I think is actually even better, more in keeping with where it's from, Africa, and the sort of iconic and tribal nature of it. So I'm using paint rollers and acrylic and putty knives, which makes it look really, you can't be detailed. You can't be really uh, precise with rollers. Um, so it's got a real, if they feel almost like cave paintings, which I think is really cool. And that actually was an outgrowth of a project I was working on, an international project where I was flown to Germany to be the American guy with Italians and French, Belgian, German, Croatian comic artists to illustrate a book that it was published years ago of the African genocide in West Africa. And it was a photojournalist and a journalist who had published this book called Black Light. And they wanted us to then take that same book and we could use any of the photos for reference if we wished, but to illustrate that whole thing. And so I was like struggling because I didn't really know. It was like this setup. I didn't know what you guys expected of me, right? So I was like, what do you guys want? I don't know what they wanted from me. So, and I could do my thing, which was brush drawings and pen and ink and, do what I normally do. And I was like, yeah, but that's, and here I am surrounded by a couple of guys whose work I was a big fan of. So I finally got to meet a couple of really powerful storytellers. And they're doing this amazing, I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to do my usual thing, no, that's not going to happen. So I had been playing with, because I teach during the summers with the Illustration Academy, and there, surrounded by John English, Mark English, Gary Kelly, C.F. Payne, Anita Kuntz, all these big time, serious #1 illustrators who all bring their A game in everything they do. And Mark English got me excited about using putty knives to draw with and stuff. And so I had them take me to a hardware store and I bought some putty knives and some paint rollers. And I sat down and I started doing these drawings with the putty knife and a big thick black acrylic. And man, it was like click, I was like, yeah, this is it, And so it was an outgrowth of that. And that's how I did the pieces for that project were done with putty knives and rollers. And that started this whole other thing. And that was also an outgrowth of Daniel Zezelj, who's the Croatian artist who actually lives in Brooklyn. He married an American woman who's a jazz musician, very cool. And so he was doing the roller thing. And I was like, man, I used rollers, but I use them for printmaking. It never occurred to me like, wow, they actually will use ink on anything else too, right? It's like how, the simple things elude us. And so I was seeing that and I'm like, oh my God, this opens up a whole world, So I started really doing a lot of that. And I did that entire project with rollers and putty knives and did like 80 some odd pieces in like a month, because they needed it, even though they told me before I left, oh, you have tons of time, man. You're going to, we're not in a rush. Then I get home and it's like, oh no, we need this by the end of the next month. I'm like, what? So I'm like, so I was doing like demos in class, but I got it all done. And anyway, so that's how I approach this on the new take. But it'll be kind of fun because I can also print the old one. And then it's like, hey, here's the director's cut, a whole new take on my old film. So that's what these are, my original layouts. And the fun thing is at the bottom of this, for page count, I'm doing a herd of wildebeests. So there's one wildebeest, two wildebeest, and they just keep growing. The herd grows, right? It's kind of fun. So like playing with this is a shadow, it's kind of fun. So that gives you at least some, it's showing you some of the comic work. It's not showing you my entire oeuvre or whatever the word is, right? My paintings and pastels and everything else, printmaking and all, it's like which is actually something that I want to bring up for comics, in the sense that, comics has been done the way they've been done for years and years and years. And there's very select, specific way that comics are done. It's penciled, they ink them, they letter them, the lettering actually comes first. on top of the pencils, and then they're inked, and then it's handed to another guy to do the color. The big companies do this. It's a division of labor, which was actually, if you really want to get crazy and start delving into the history of copyright, goes back to a loophole that was designed for textiles. But they found it was a great way to own everything and not give anything to the workers. And so there's a division of labor, because then it becomes a collective work, and you don't become a creator. You're no longer a creator. You're a pair of hands that's the guy that does pencils. This is the guy that does inks. This is the guy that does letters. This is the guy that does colors. None of them are creators. Right? So when I do my books, which, for Marvel and DC, they have to make me an actual employee of the company so they can own everything, and then I can't claim that I own Batman. I think it's funny. It's like this weird juggling act that lawyers do, when it's like, well, why don't you just write in the contract that I don't own anything? Like, it's a contract, right? I mean, whatever. Okay, so anyway, so they jump through these weird hoops to do that, but it's always, now of course we've jumped into the digital land, and so a lot of people are inking their comics, quote unquote, inking digitally, and but it's it's still this imitation of traditional tactile brush and ink. But when I came into comics, I mentioned the studio gang, and they were certainly using those same tools, right? But what they did was a breakout was the content, the spending the amount of time on the work, because they were kids. They were like, their rent was maybe $100 a month at that. And so they would spend a week on a page. It was all about the art. And the old guys were, not all of them, obviously, but some of them were really bent out of shape about it. They're like, well, I can't do that. I got a family to feed. I've got a roof to put over my head. I got to pay for my car insurance. I got to put food in the mouths of my kids. And it's like, yeah, well, that's great. You can still do that. But these guys were all about the art. And so they turned it into this, not that it wasn't already an art form, because it was, but they like lavished so much attention. And then they also broke out of comics and were doing illustrated books and posters and prints and, record album covers. And, they were like, why can't we do everything? And then we were the beneficiaries of that, and actually, connected with those guys personally, physically, like, hey, I want to meet these people, and I'm, pass that baton, keep running. And so, and we were being influenced by them to also look at the bigger world of art. And so, Kent Williams and I, Jay Muth, Scott Hampton, these people, Ray Lago, we're looking at the bigger world. And so it was like, I snuck into the Pratt labs when I was in art school and taught myself how to do etching. I took the litho class. I figured out how to do lino cuts on my own, and I basically had to teach myself how to oil paint. Thank God for Jeff Jones, who took us out landscape painting, saving grace. And, from emulating all my heroes. But I wanted to do it all. And then why can't comics have that stuff? You know what I mean? Why can't comics be painted? Why can't I do a comic book that's done with etchings? Why can't I do a comic book that's done with a wood cut or a lino cut? Or even I would take my old erasers and using the X-Acto blade, make rubber stamps. Why can't I do a comic that way? Anything goes. Just like illustration, when I taught illustration at Pratt, I had so many students who were like, oh, one kid did bring in an etching, and he's a teacher now. It's really fun. We just out of the blue got back in touch with me, but he brought in an etching, and I did a serious crit on this etching, and this girl that later became my wife was like, what? I didn't know we could do etchings. And I'm like, it's illustration can be anything, you could do basket weaving. I don't care, as long as it illustrates, it solves the problem, what? So why can't comics go to those same places? They can be anything. It can be photographs. It can be, you can tell a story in a million, zillion, jillion ways, cajillion. It doesn't have, you don't have to be the typical comic book person, you know? You don't have to work for Marvel and DC. In fact, it's probably better if you don't, if you go independent and own your creation. Be a creator. Don't just be a pair of hands, right? This is the same information that I give my illustration students at Ringling. It's like, you can be, why do you want to be the pair of hands? Well, I want to get a job. It's like, this shouldn't be about jobs. This should be about how do you satisfy yourself as a creative individual over the long haul, because it's a long haul. And yeah, you know, oh, but I want to work my way up through the gaming industry. Why? Why don't you want to be the guy that's hiring people who want to work their way up through the gaming industry? Why don't you want to be the creator, you know, that's hiring the risks to make you money instead of the other way around? Same here. Why do you, you know, look at Mike Mignola. You know, I remember we were all coming up at the same time. We all started exactly the same time. And I remember, you know, and Mignola did go through that thing. He was like, and he was good at it. You know what I mean? He could do Superman and Batman, and he could do all that stuff, and he did it. And then he came up with Hellboy. And I remember, like, right after that first issue of Hellboy came out, I remember Mike going, man, I'm never working for these companies again. He's like, I just had so much fun. He goes, this is where it's at. I'm like, yeah, you know, absolutely, you know. You want to be the independent guy. You want to create, right? And you can do that now. You got Kickstarter, you got GoFundMe, you have, I don't know what is the other ones, you know, whatever. There's all these places you can go now that you can be the creator, and people are really excited. They want to be part of making these things happen. So this crowdfunding stuff is real, and you can own it all, you know, and you're young enough that, you know, even before all that, I was like, you know, you're young enough. You can work at Kinko's and make your comic books. And then you may hit it big, because Hollywood is basically bankrupt right now, creatively bankrupt. And comics are fueling that industry. You know, they love that, because there it is, that, wow, it's already done. All we got to do is shoot the damn thing, right? You can be that person. So hopefully that's what you're going to see here. But you know, so again, like, you know, maybe we can thread stuff in where you see the, you know, like, I'm a painter, I do gallery work, I do multiple streams of income, and it all feeds each other constantly, right? Everything feeds everything else, and you can't beat that. You're bringing your entire life into this thing. And that's what I think comics needs. It needs major infusion of something other than more comics. That's, you know, it's so self-referential, and which is fine. You know, you want to be that guy. I get it. You know, I wanted to draw Batman too. You know, I wanted to draw Wolverine, and there's this never ending, you know, supply of people that want to do that. And the companies know this, and it's like, well, that's fine, you know, but understand, you don't own anything. I did Wolverine. I never made a dime in royalties. You don't, you know, you get what you get. And I went in, no, I knew all that, you know, I understood. But it's better now. You don't have to do that. But I get the urge to want to do that with your favorite characters. But think bigger than that, you know, think outside of that, so that, you know, the one thing that was great about my working for those companies is I have an audience, you know, and that's something that illustrators don't have. And there was a point when the comics implosion was happening, and a lot of illustrators were hurting, and they kind of looked at comics going, man, you know, I want to do that. And so they came over, and I remember talking to, you know, some of my buddies, you know, that were in seats of power in comics, and they were like, nah, these illustrators are assholes. I don't ever want to hire these guys again, because they don't actually care about comics, right? They just saw it as a way to make money. And it's like they didn't give a rat's ass about comics. And they came in and thought, oh, I'll do covers. It'll be great. You know, yeah, it's the glory spot. But they brought their egos with them. That just like was a major turnoff. And what they look at and what they see, and I get it, you know, it's like, wow, these guys, people know who they are. People are following their work. You know what I mean? And an illustrator, the illustrator's fans are other illustrators. It's a very incestuous, it's all incestuous. Even comics is incestuous, but you actually have people that want to follow your work that aren't people that do that work, right? In illustration, it's you know, people are eating it up they get it. you're preaching to the choir. And you definitely turning people on to becoming some of that through that. I was one of those people. But comics, you actually develop an audience who will follow your work, who want to see what you're doing, that aren't people that do it. That's a big difference. That's a big deal. And that actually goes back to the original illustrators, the golden age. Howard Pyle, N.C. Wyeth, Harvey Dunn, Dean Cornwell, go through the list. They were household names of their day. They were the rock stars. They didn't, you didn't have rock and roll. You had Howard Pyle, you had N.C. Wyeth, you had Norman Rockwell, you had they were household names because they were the entertainment other than movie stars. That was it. And magazines, printed matter, that's where people got their entertainment besides going to the movies. And those were household names, and people followed. Well, I love N.C. Wyeth. I'll buy anything N.C. Wyeth does, that kind of thing. So comics is the closest thing to that, besides rock and roll, and that kind of thing, So, and even in gaming, yeah, there are incredible talents in gaming and all that, and viz dev and all. They're amazing talents. Those are amazing talents for other amazing talents and for people who are also in doing that work. Same way as illustration. They don't have followings outside of industry, Comics does, and that's a big difference. It's a big deal.